being tested. So what exactly is the Trump doctrine? Joining us now, two former officials in the George W. Bush administration. Matt Schlapp, former political director to President Bush and current chairman of the American Conservative Union, and David Frum, former Bush speechwriter and current senior editor of The Atlantic. So, David Frum, let me start with you. It was meddling doesn't work. We're going to stay out. We're going to fight ISIS. We heard it loud and clear from Tillerson and Haley just within days. Assad is not our problem. Let them figure it out. And then, coincidentally or not, you have this bombing, these ugly images, and the president says, I've had a change. How significant a pivot are you seeing?
Not very. One of the defining characteristics of Donald Trump, and America's adversaries in the world have surely noted this, is that he issues threats and does not execute. We see that at home, and we see that abroad. Many of the threats, by the way, are threats he should never have issued in the first place. I think we're all glad that he doesn't sue every newspaper that he threatens to sue. But adversaries notice he doesn't sue the newspapers he threatens to sue. He doesn't carry out the investigations of voter fraud that, again, they're false, and we're glad he doesn't do it. He says he will, he doesn't do it. And I think international adversaries have taken the mark. Trump bluffs, and he doesn't follow through.
Matt Schlapp, Marco Rubio says he thinks it was a mistake. He doesn't think it was a coincidence that one day Assad hears he's not on the U.S. radar, and the next day he kills kids with toxic gas. What do you think?
Yeah, pretty serious charge and comments from Marco Rubio, but it also shows you that words matter and have immediate consequences. And I think Secretary Tillerson and others, it's a moment to reflect upon the fact that the whole world is watching when they talk. And I think presidents and new administrations tend to get mugged by reality. You come into office, you get sworn in, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and then reality hits. And the world is a very scary and dangerous place, and this rather green foreign policy team is having to confront it.
So what do you think they're going to do here? Because we know the window is not that big. What we saw in 2013 was every bit as bad and numerically much worse than what we just saw. So nothing happened there. There wasn't the resolve. Yes, you're getting more chirping out of Congress to do something now than you did with Obama back then. But do you think anything happens that's materially different?
If that's to me, Chris,
yes,
I guess
Matt.
The concern I have is this, which is we continue to follow this kind of false choice of, do we knock out a dictator, or do we knock out the terrorists, or do we knock out both? And what I worry about is, airstrikes only go so far. We know that. They sound great because it doesn't sound like there'll be boots on the ground. But the fact is, if we're going to get serious, then it's a big deployment. We've done this in other Middle Eastern countries, and we look back as a country and we say, was that the right way to approach it, being that interventionist, that aggressive? I think the real question Americans have across the country, I think Donald Trump resonated with them, is, do we put our brave young men and women in the military in between radicalized Sunni and Shia and let them lose their lives and get an outcome that we still look back at and say, what was it for?
Right, but Americans, David Frum, are also going to weigh and measure the president based on what he's promised to do. That's happening at home. It's going to also happen with promises abroad. They've crossed too many lines. Now I feel differently. North Korea will go it alone. He had written in books many years ago that he had thoughts of going at North Korea militarily to stop them. Is he now in a box where he has to act on those words?
He won't act, so obviously he doesn't have to. Look at the North Korea situation. The Trump administration's idea seems to be to put pressure on China, to put pressure on North Korea. Why didn't anybody ever think of that before? Well, everybody has thought of that before. The question is, how many instrumentalities of power do you have against China, and how do you use them? Donald Trump has one fewer instrumentality against China than all of his predecessors do, and that is that he and his family are very financially beholden to the Chinese. The Chinese are right now licensing his daughter's brands. The Chinese have granted Donald Trump trademarks that he had sought and been refused for years. The Chinese bank with connections to the state just tried to do the Kushner family a $400 million bailout on a troubled office building on Fifth Avenue. The Chinese recognize how the Trump family does business because that's how their leaders do business. And they understand that if you put a little something on the table, you get a warmer smile. But taking those emoluments makes it difficult then for you to credibly say to the Chinese, this time it's different. This time it's different from George W. Bush. This time it's different from Obama. This time we really mean it when we say you have to cut off the North Korean, your trade with North Korea.
Matt Schlapp, David Frum using that word emoluments. That's a constitutional word. You were giving it the head shake. You don't like what he says. Why?
Well, look, it just doesn't make any sense, because if there's any power on the globe that Trump has been the toughest on, it's been China. Now, we have this big meeting, and we'll see
Well, you
how
got to
it goes.
define. What do
But
you mean by toughest, though? You mean how he's talked? Because there is something to what David's saying in terms of his actions, his personal actions. He's been big on China. He wants to be close to China with his business relationships. But politically, he said they're raping the U.S.
Look, it's an important relationship, and I think most observers of this past campaign and Donald Trump as president would say he is dramatically changing our position vis-a-vis China. I know it's true because everybody in Washington is panicked over what this means. And when you say what is the Trump doctrine, the one thing I see is this, which is no longer are we going to shed America's economic interests for strategic interests around the globe. I think he's going to put America's economic interests front and center, and he's going to do this with the relationship with China. And I think China understands this very clearly as well. I think we can make all of the, David can make all the charges he wants about the ethics around Donald Trump's business, but at the end of the day, the ethics is overseen, certainly by Ivanka and Jared, by some of the most premier Democratic lawyers who have worked for Democratic presidents. They have set this up in the correct way. Yes, it's unconventional, but nobody can question the fact that Donald Trump is going to be tougher on China than we've seen on any president in the last 20 years.
We'll have to see on what he actually does. In terms of the ethics, David, I'll give you the last word. Last time I checked, lawyers do what you tell them to do.
The ethical tribune that Matt is referring to is Jamie Gorelick, who took $26 million out of the collapse of Fannie Mae. That is, I think, probably the first time on air that any Republican has referenced her as their moral guide.